Welcome to my Monster Mash themed tree. Today I'm going to share with you how to make a spooky, scary skeleton. The supplies you'll need are a plastic skeleton, aluminum foil for the eyeballs, plaster for the eyeballs, cheesecloth, and some liquid starch. Let's begin with the eyes. Crumble your aluminum foil down into a small ball. The ball should fit within the eye sockets of the skull. Take your plaster, dip it in water, and make sure you really remove the excess water. Try to keep it nice and flat if you can. Then place the aluminum foil ball inside, taking the extra plaster, just kind of twisting it around to make the base of the eyeball. Place it inside the skull, and surprisingly, the plaster will almost immediately adhere to the skull. I wanted one eye popping out and the other one in place. So this is obviously my eye-popping eyeball. For the other one, I wanted it to sit deeper inside the eye. So once again, I crumbled up a ball and then wrapped it in plaster wrap. Once it was wrapped in plaster wrap, I had to make sure that it could fit within the eye socket. So this one actually had to be a pinch smaller. And then the excess plaster that I had to be trimmed away. Once I placed that inside the socket, like I said, it only took a moment before the plaster adhered the eye to the plastic skull. This is a really quick craft. Get yourself some liquid starch, place it in a bowl, and some cheesecloth. This, I feel like, is where the real magic happens because it creates an amazing texture on the skull. And there is no magical science to making this happen, y'all. Just drape that cheesecloth over the skull. Use your brush to kind of press the starch into place. You want to make sure to squeeze that cheesecloth into all the nooks and crannies and crevices. That way you don't lose any of the really cool details of the skull, like the teeth, or of course the nose. When you're doing this, like I said, there's no exact science. If you get some wrinkles in your cheesecloth, go with it. What that will do is give your skull more of a texture when you get ready to add the paint to it. So after you're finished with this, and by the way, if you're wondering how long I waited for the eyes to dry before adding the cheesecloth, not long at all. Not even an hour. The plaster dries that quickly. When you have this cheesecloth and liquid starch on there, you might want to place it in front of a fan to kind of speed up the drying process. Don't forget to rotate it when it's in front of the fan because I noticed a lot of the starch will drip down to the base of the skull, making it so that part dries the slowest. All you have to do for that is just flip it over and continue to let it dry. Without a fan, this would probably need to dry overnight, depending on the humidity where you live. Once you're completely finished, don't forget to tuck all parts of the cheesecloth in, making it so you don't have any parts hanging out. And for the bottom or the jaw, all you have to do is simply cut an additional piece and press it into place with the starch. Like I said, no science to this one. You can't mess it up. Now, if there are places where you don't get your cheesecloth completely covering the skull, it might not take to the paint quite as well, and it could also cause the paint to chip. So you will want to make sure that all parts of the skeleton are covered with cheesecloth. For the next phase of the project, I took it outside and I mixed up kind of a watery black paint, watery enough that it was easy to paint over the surface of the skeleton. I painted it completely black because this was going to make it so I could really achieve an antiqued look on the skeleton. And yes, I just poured some of my coffee in there. Don't judge. I use what works. Once that was dry, I kind of used a little bit of a brown and mixed it with my white to give it kind of an antiqued and dirty white. Using a brush that I would call a dry brush, meaning it's not completely saturated with paint, just gently wipe that over the skeleton, and that's where I think it becomes really exciting because you can start to see the cool texture of the cheesecloth, and it will really give you the antiqued look you're going for on your skeleton. The key is, however, you don't want to overpaint it. You want to make sure that quite a bit of the black shows through, that you can really see all the fine details of the teeth and the eyes and the jawline as you paint. So make sure that as you're doing this, keep your brush kind of dry. Remember, you can always add more paint, but if you add too much paint in the beginning, you can't take it away. So with that in mind, just go over your entire skeleton with a dry brush. Let's face it, the eyes are what has it when it comes to this project. I mixed up a brighter white for the eyes so they would stand out a little more and went about painting them the same way, except when I painted the front portion of the eye, I really did saturate it with paint so not much black showed through. The key after that is, once you've let it dry, think about the base color for your iris. So I decided to go with a green color, and I painted a circle right in the center of each eyeball of that green. Let me show you. Once that was done, I used lighter values of that green and darker to kind of create the highlights to really bring the eyes to life. I wanted the skull to appear old and rotten, but yet the eyes to have that creepy, still alive kind of look. Once that was finished, I busted out a darker value and added those highlights as well. It's important that you let this paint dry just a pinch before you go to the next color, or else the colors will start to get muddy. I'm using an acrylic paint. While you wait for the eye to dry, go ahead and add your skinny, veiny, bloodshot eyes to your eye. You'll notice I'm using a really thin brush for this, and I always balance my hand on the surface of which I'm painting. It helps me have a more steady hand. Next up, the pupils, and then outlining the iris of the eye to really make it pop. I painted blue-eyed skeletons and green-eyed skeletons, but any color eye would do. Once you're finished, like I said, outline the eye to really make it stand out. However, let it dry before you add the very last, and to me, most important part of the eye, which is the highlight. Here, let me show you. Boom. Am I right? Again, wait till that paint dries a little bit and you won't have that smear effect that I've got. But the highlight really makes it pop. And then just take that skeleton and find a good place for it on your Halloween tree. You do have a Halloween tree, right? You don't? Get you one. They're amazing. Thanks for letting me share, guys.